Back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about how chess pieces move. If you already know this, that's okay. First, we're going to be talking about the pawns. The pawns are the ones that are in the front at the beginning of a chess game. There are 8 on both sides. They have the most of their species or whatever. How do pawns move? You can move any single pawn you want, and they can move 2 steps. They can move 1 step, but that's all they can move. They can also move diagonal 1 step if they're taking a different piece. So they can take a pawn, they can take a queen, but they have to take diagonal. They cannot take forward. So for example, if we went here, the pawn cannot move anymore because it's blocked. So it can't go diagonal because there's nothing to take, and it can't go forward. So the pawns are kind of simple because they really don't do much other than 1 step, 2 steps, and taking diagonal. But that's how a pawn moves. Next, the knight. The knight goes in an L shape, like one step this way, 3 steps up, 1 step, or 3 steps this way, 1 step that way. So if you went like this, the knight can move 3 steps this way, 1 step that way, and L. And this knight can go 1, 3, 1, and L. That's how a knight moves. The special power of a knight is that it can jump over things. So see how, right here, the bishop can't move anywhere because the pawn blocks it. Same for the rook, queen, and king. But the knight can jump right over the pawns that block the other pieces. The way to identify a knight is it looks like a horse. So some people actually call it a horse instead of a knight. Next, the bishop. The bishop is not possible to move on move 1 because it's blocked by the pawns. It also only moves diagonal. It cannot move any other way. So for example, if this happened, the bishop can now move, but it still cannot go this way because the pawn blocks it. And remember, bishops cannot jump over other pieces. That's only for knights. So now the bishop can come out anywhere on the diagonal. Same goes for the other bishops. There's nothing really special about a bishop, but they can just move on diagonals. They can move this way. They're useful at times. For example, right here. Now this bishop protects the queen and delivers mate. So they are important pieces, but they can only move on diagonals. The way to identify a bishop is in the beginning of the game, the bishop is right next to the king or the bishop is next to the king and next to the queen. It also has a cross on it in the middle of the piece. So that's how you can tell. Now, next, the rook. The rook is also not possible to move on move 1 because as the knight, unlike the knight, it cannot jump over pieces. So, let's say you did this, and they also did this. Now the rook can move. Rooks can only move up and sideways. So up and sideways. They can also move back. They can move back, up, side, and side. They can, but the only way they cannot go is a diagonal, like a bishop. A bishop can go diagonal. A rook cannot. A rook can only go forward. Like this rook could not go over here. It can only go this way, this way. The rooks always start, how to identify a rook is they always start in the corners of the board on move 1. And also, they sort of look like castles. So, it's not too hard to find them. They are actually the second most valuable piece at 5 points. so they are quite valuable. Next, the most valuable piece other than the king is the queen. The queen, just like the bishop and rook, cannot move on move 1 because it cannot jump over the pawns. But if you were to move a pawn next to the queen, then it can move. The queen moves in a side, like side, up, and diagonal. So the queen can go this way, or down. So it can basically do what the rook does and what the bishop does, but it cannot go in L shapes. Like if a knight was here, the knight could take this pawn. The queen cannot do that. It can just move like the rook and bishop combined. It also pretty much moves in like a compass way. So, how to identify a queen? The queen is always right next to the king. It is also the only piece that has like a crown. It has the prong shapes on the top. Next, and find the king. The king usually doesn't move that much, but when you get to end games, that's when you need king movement. The king, although the king is the only piece that cannot be taken, because then you'll lose the game, it is not that good of a piece because it can only move 1 step. It can only move 1 step in a square, at least. It can go diagonal, it can go sideways, it can go up, it can go back, but it can only move 1. The bishop, on the other hand, can move the whole, as many as it wants. The queen can move as many as it wants. The knight can move in an L. The rook can move as many as it wants. The king can only move 1. So that's one way the king can move. The other way a king can move is by castling. Castling is what happens when both the king and rook have not moved and there's nothing in between them. So in the start of the game, this king and rook are separated by the knight and bishop. So when we do this, now there's nothing separating them because the knight and bishop have moved. So now the king can actually move 2 steps and switch places with the rook. So now that's called castling. Both can do this and then the game will continue. This is done to make the king safer, and it's also the only other way the king can move other than moving 1 step. The way to identify a king is it has a cross above its piece, and it also kind of looks like a crown for a king, whereas the queen looks like a crown for a queen. Okay, so that is how chess pieces move. Hopefully that was helpful and beneficial. Thank you for watching.